After Blaze, Stephen King Revisited. I'm going to go ahead and read the introduction, which is the same for all the blog posts, because a lot of what I would say about this is said there, and then I'm going to add in some things I might have left out as I go. After Blaze, Stephen King Revisited. The plan is to reread all of Stephen King's works in the order they were published. Richard Chismar of Cemetery Dance had the vision. I'm doing it because I'm a writer and I want to improve my fiction. I love Stephen King's stories. I think there is something to be learned through this process. You can also go back to the beginning and read Before Carrie or any of my other posts up through this one and beyond by checking out this link to the master list of all my Stephen King Revisited posts. So I'm up to Blaze. I still got maybe a fourth, maybe a fifth of his catalog left to read, and doing blog posts before and after each of the stories. So this was Blaze, a kind of a lesser known novel of his, and we talk about it here in this post. Stephen King opens Blaze with a warning that it is a trunk novel, a story that's been set aside in a metaphorical trunk because the author doesn't like it or no one wants it. With King's publishing history, I think we know which reason this novel must have been trunked. This book may hold a trunk record, though. It languished for 35 years by the time it was published in 2007, after the first draft was completed in 1972 and 73. A lot of this came in a long introduction that he wrote that almost read like an apology for the novel. But he really didn't like the first form of it, and apparently this one was very different from the very first draft of that novel that eventually became this. King says he read the manuscript over on two different occasions, years apart, and hated it both times. He mentioned that Hard Case Crime and The Colorado Kid had slow royalty payments. I'm not sure if he meant due to the buyers or due to the publisher. Hard Case Crime is a small crime fiction publisher, and they've published now 3 of Stephen King's short crime fiction stories. Colorado Kid was not one of my favorite books. It was an interesting sort of story, but didn't really have an ending to it. And he kind of warned you all the way through the story that it didn't have an ending. I don't. And again, when he says slow payments, he says that's typical. But again, I don't know if he meant that's typical of buyers of crime fiction or if that's typical of publishers of crime fiction. I don't know. There's probably a number of crime fiction publishers who would take exception to that. At some point, he lost a novel called The Cannibals. It was over 200 pages long. Under the Dome was 50 pages long when he lost that and had to start over. I sure would like to see The Cannibals, and I'm not sure if maybe The Cannibals got changed into Cell, which came along later, but kind of wish he might revisit that story in some form if he hasn't already. He had to borrow back his own copy of Blaze from a library that held it as part of a collection. They Xeroxed it for him because they didn't trust him not to lose it again. Proceeds for this novel at one point went to the Haven Foundation that supported writers in need, I believe. King says he kept the time period of the novel vague and the emotion in the piece dry on purpose. The novel opens with a haunted man boosting himself a ride. Shawshank Prison is mentioned as the place he'll end up if any of this goes wrong. Well, it almost has to go wrong, doesn't it? The mentally impaired criminal forgets his mask during one robbery and then goes on to make other smaller mistakes that lead to bigger trouble. He got by over the years with being a dumb guy with slightly smarter partners. There are lots of good bits about the kidnapper slipping up that are peppered with precision throughout the story. So it's a very well told story in that sense. My laws, says a character like old Tom from The Stand. The baby shop clerk's personality and speech patterns changed a good bit between our meetings with her. I don't know if Stephen King would agree with me, but I do think her personality is presented both places. You could say it's because she was talking to 2 different types of people at the time, but I think he just kind of let her personality and speech slide a little bit for his purposes in a scene. Bool, King writes in one section, it's King's new favorite word for God's sakes. He used bool extensively in the previous novel Lizzie's Story, and I hope this word doesn't hang around long in the coming books. Please move on to another fixation, sir. Stephen King, and I think I do this too, I think a lot of writers do, tends to catch on to a certain phrase or word that gets used a lot of stories in a row and then kind of drifts out of use as other obsessions come back in. So as I'm writing a story every day in May, I'm finding myself doing that. There's phrases and turns of phrase and little cheats that I do that I think I'm leaning on pretty heavy as I write. So especially if you're putting out a lot of work, sometimes you have to watch that to be sure it's not happening. An FBI agent prays over a toilet like the warden from the Breakers compound in the Dark Tower. Flashbacks in the story are written well and interestingly. King says he thought the flashbacks were the best part of the original draft. At the risk of encouraging King's flashback addiction, the past and present are almost of equal interest in this version of the story, in my opinion. Both carried me through the text swiftly. For some reason, the flashback to the blueberry farm later in the novel drew me in the most, and right at the beginning when I didn't know anything about what was going to happen in that vignette. King tends to give characters a way out before the really bad stuff happens, that they have a path that if they took it while it was open, before everything got out of control, they would have been spared the suffering to come. They never take it. In the context of Blaze, our character's way out was his hard work that led to an offer that fell through with an untimely loss in his youth. In this case, the way out was largely outside his control. In the midst of a rolling tragedy, King offers some isolated side redemptions that mean a lot. An unknown legitimate son goes on to become make something of himself with no knowledge of the events in the story. A baby looks up for a particular face for a small moment. The character is remembered. There's one hint at a psychic connection between the main character and the partner who later haunts his imagination. Other than that, it appears our character has limited access to a well of intelligence within himself no one thought possible. We have a dramatic ending followed by an excerpt from a news conference, which is sometimes how King decides to finish off his stories. My next post in this series will be before Duma Key, which will be linked on the master list of all my Stephen King Revisited posts. Duma Key is a pretty long book, and I'm currently, as of the time I'm recording this, broadcasting this, I'm in the middle of Duma Key, and hopefully we'll keep moving along because I'd like to finish up all of King's books by the end of this year. Of course, I said the same thing last year, but I am a little further along this time, so hopefully I can succeed at that and move to revisiting another author with some earnest there.